Hey everybody, Basic Foods. We are going to be learning about some of the foodborne illnesses on your purple sheet that I gave out to you in class. Looks like this. We're going to talk about different ones very briefly so you have an idea of what different causes and food sources are of different foodborne illnesses and how to prevent. So the first one we're going to talk about is Clostridium botulism. Botulism is probably the most common reference to what this foodborne illness is caused. Key offenders are improperly sealed canned goods, bottles, and if you ever see like a popper that is popped on a shelf-stable food, you should not eat or drink it. I would avoid swollen or dented cans. This particular foodborne illness is the most serious and can cause death. So you definitely, if you see milky or foamy weird liquid on top of a canned good or a jarred item, you should not eat it. So make sure you examine jars, bottles, cans before you consume. And if you have a particular food that was cooked previously in a jar or in a can, you should not store it at room temperature. All right, we briefly talked about salmonella in one of our previous lessons. Our biggest offender for salmonella is going to be poultry and eggs and fish. We might see it sometimes in meat or contaminated foods like peanut butter. There's always been salmonella outbreaks with peanut butter. Typical foodborne illness symptoms, you're going to have diarrhea, vomiting, fever. But the big takeaways for a lot of these different ones, which is very similar to E. coli, is keep raw food away from cooked food. Don't put cooked food on the same plate that you had raw food on. Make sure you cook your foods thoroughly and don't eat foods that might have raw eggs in it, like cookie dough, even though it tastes delicious. E. coli, probably the biggest offender for E. coli is going to be beef. And then also we have an issue with untreated water, which then does filter to ground vegetables like that are grown on a farm. You can get it from things like unpasteurized milk and undercooked products and stuff, but I'm going to say beef and water are going to be your biggest issues with E. coli. Vomiting, diarrhea, kidney failure, and again, cook meat thoroughly, avoid cross-contamination. Cross-contamination is where you take bacteria from something raw or bacteria from something that is infected, and you move it to something else, like you put it on a clean plate or you touch a surface and it's contaminated you've contaminated that surface. So make sure you wash vegetables before you eat them. Don't drink untreated water out of a stream. Down to Staphylococcus aureus. These Staphylococcus aureus comes from skin or throat infections that move from the contaminated food handler to the consumer. So these are some symptoms you might see. The big thing is that you want to wash your hands thoroughly, and if you do have an open wound, you want to make sure that you cover that wound so that you don't spread anything that you have to somebody that might be eating your food. Hepatitis A, not a really huge foodborne illness issue right now, but there was an issue with Chi-Chi's, which is a restaurant that is now since closed, where people were preparing green onions in Mexico, and they did not wash their hands, and they sent the green onions into the United States, and they were not cooked for salsa, and then they was given to consumers at a Chi-Chi's restaurant, which I used to live by. So ultimately, there are vaccines for hepatitis A today, but ultimately, again, you want to make sure you wash your hands, wear gloves if you have an open wound, and if you are infected, you should wear a mask. And these days, you should wear a mask whenever you're preparing any food for anybody else, anything that anybody's going to eat. Another we're going to talk about is Campylobacter jejuni, which is raw milk or raw milk products like cheese and yogurt. This is milk that is unpasteurized. It means that it wasn't heated in a processing facility to a certain temperature. You can also get it from untreated water or raw or undercooked meat, poultry, or shellfish. Here's some typical symptoms that you might experience, and the bottom line here is don't drink untreated water like out of a stream or unpasteurized milk, raw milk, straight from the udders of a cow, and make sure that you cook your meat and fish thoroughly. Clostridium perfringens is the buffet germ, and this is probably the most common, and it's probably the least serious. It lasts less than 24 hours. If you've ever been to a buffet, and you've felt sick afterwards, usually the issue is that hot foods are not kept hot and cold foods are not kept cold. So make sure that you Keep foods at correct temperatures. And if you remember from a previous lesson, you want to keep food out of what we call the danger zone, which is 40 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So you want to keep it below that or above 140. And make sure that things that like roasts, casseroles, things like that are kept hot while serving. Last one we're going to talk about here is listeria, which you're going to see a video a little bit later in this week. Listeria comes mostly from ground fruits and vegetables, and with untreated water sources, sometimes you'll have a water source that is contaminated and it runs off to farms that produce fruits and vegetables. You can also have an issue for pregnant women here. Contaminated lunch meat, you want to make sure that you heat, if you are pregnant, you want to heat lunch meat to steaming and avoid processed meats that are undercooked. Make sure that you wash fruits and vegetables that are close to the ground. And a big key factor with listeria is that it can lead to miscarriage in pregnant mothers. So you want to make sure that if you were indeed pregnant in the future, that you heat your lunch meat to steaming. Don't eat, smoked meats that weren't reheated or lunch meat that wasn't reheated. So hopefully you learned a little bit about foodborne illness, and you'll be looking at some current events and different situations upcoming.